Syrian regime slams the United Nations for a lack of objectivity in the conflict as the Security Council pushes for a peace plan and political transition. In a new video, the Islamic State terror group calls for Turks to rebel against their government, and meanwhile, having failed to form a coalition, Ankara moves closer to early elections. Shrine bombing in Bangkok. The death toll rises at least to 20 people, with a massive manhunt underway for a suspect captured on camera leaving a backpack at the scene.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the news today. It's an unusual exchange between the UN and the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The regime hitting back at criticism from UN envoy Staffan de Mistura over deadly airstrikes, saying the body lacks objectivity. But the UN is also now floating a peace plan to involve members of the government and opposition. Leo Homberg explains.
In a rare showcase of unity and after 2 years of disagreements, the UN Security Council has unanimously approved a push for Syrian peace talks, while the death toll in one of the bloodiest government air attacks on a rebel-held town outside Damascus has risen to over 100. The agreed-on text, which was drafted by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, adopts the proposal of UN mediator Staffan de Mistura, inviting Syria's warring parties to take part in 4 UN-led working groups on how to implement a roadmap to peace in the war-battered country.
The Security Council stresses that the only sustainable solution to the current crisis in Syria is through an inclusive and Syrian-led political process that meets the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people.
Among other issues, the Geneva Communique demands that all parties commit to the establishment of an inclusive transitional governing body with full executive powers. Meanwhile, the core question on the role of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad remains unresolved, with his 2 main allies, Iran and Russia, passionately advocating he stay in power.
If some of our partners believe that it is imperative to agree beforehand that the president will resign by the end of the transitional period, then this position is unacceptable for Russia.
Yet the Syrian government was less than excited to hear the news from the Security Council. On Tuesday, the regime accused the UN Special Envoy of bias, as it has several times in the past, saying his recent statements condemning the deadly government airstrikes show his lack of objectivity. In the meantime, the brutal fighting in the country continues, and the deteriorating humanitarian crisis affecting the population is left without any real solution.
I appeal to every party engaged in violence and fighting to protect civilians and to respect international humanitarian law.
The peace initiative is set to begin in September, but this is the Middle East, and until then, anything can happen.
Yes, and with me right now here in the studio, Senior Middle East analyst Ali Waqid. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
What can happen in the meantime?
Well, in the meantime, it is already happening, Lucy. These atrocities, these bombers that we are seeing from both the regime and the rebels, and we are going to see until September, when this initiative will be officially launched by the Security Council, more of these bloodshed and more confrontation on sensitive regions like Damascus and the Alawite region of Latakia.
I need to understand something. How come the UN is waking up only now? And of course the Syrian regime is saying lack of objectivity when we're seeing the atrocities, like you're saying, that are happening in Syria. This is a kind of cynical to say that, but how come the UN is just now seeing, after the chemical weapon and after the massacres and after children being buried under buildings, how come the UN is just saying this is wrong?
I don't agree that the UN just wake up. I think that this was the first time that there was a kind of an opportunity to reach this unanimity among the members of the Security Council, which mean more specifically Russia and China joining this international effort that called for a transition period, a political transition in Syria, which opened the door to different interpretations and analyses on maybe for the first time, the Russians believe that Bashar Assad might not be part of any political arrangement in Syria. And on the other hand, all the parties understand that with all the efforts and the money that was invested by the Arab Gulf countries in the rebels and Turkey, etc., they did not succeed to destabilize the regime.
So what? Now Russia agrees that there should be a transition in Syria, and on the other hand, we're seeing the United States just a few months ago saying that maybe Bashar al-Assad should stay in his position.
Everybody is agreed upon the fact that there should be a transition, a political transition, but there is differences about what should be the end of this transition, because Saudis and Americans and Westerns in general don't want to see Bashar al-Assad part of this transition. The Russians say he should be part, and if he wins elections, he should be the president. And this is the big, there are 4 points in the Security Council initiative: safety and protection, legal issues, humanitarian, and of course the political transition. And this is the most important point on what would be the result of a political transition and whether Bashar Assad should or not be part of this transition.
And from your perspective, really, with the situation that Syria is in right now, with the rebels fighting the Syrian regime, with IS, with all the chaos that we're seeing all around, really, can Syria get into an election period and actually conduct like a normal election campaign?
It looks like a deep chaos and uncontrolled chaos, but Lucy, every part of the fighting parties have a sponsor, have an international sponsor. The Jabhat al-Nusra had the Saudis and the Qataris. The Syrians had the Iranians. And if the United States and the Security Council will impose this initiative over the Iranians and over the Saudis, which it means immediately that the flow of weapons and of fighters to Syria can diminish, and it can open the road for political talks. I think that for the first time we understand that the fights is getting to a deadlock, and there should be a political solution. Now the question is on how would look this political solution. We are talking about dividing Syria into Sunnite and Shiite and Alawites and Druze, etc. And of course, the big difference is whether the regime, represented by its president, should be part or no of this transition. And I must mention that for the first time, I noticed that the close of Bashar Assad, when we talked to them in the last 2 days, I did not feel a unanimity whether they fully count on Russia or they don't fully count on Russia, or they feel that maybe there is a beginning of a change in the Russian position. We heard Lavrov in your report saying that we do not agree on this condition that Bashar Assad should not be part of the transition period. But when we talk to close assistants of the president and leaders of Ba'ath Party in Syria, for the first time I felt in their voice that they were not so confident that Russia is still 100% backing not the regime but backing Bashar Assad.
It's amazing. Maybe it comes right after the meeting with Iran. I wonder what happened there. Ali Waqid, thank you very much for this. And out of Turkey, with a new threat coming from the Islamic State terror group on one side and the failure to form a coalition after the elections on the other, President Tayyip Erdogan is facing one of his most difficult challenges as the one and only unquestionable ruler of Turkey. Ayman Sixik has more.
After months of delay, Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu finally reached out to the pro-secular party in Turkey in a desperate attempt at forming a coalition. But he returned defeated.
The current state of affairs does not point to the possibility of a coalition. It does not point to the possibility of a coalition for elections either. Bacelli has already said they would not support a minority government. He stressed that MHP would not support early elections.
The coalition efforts follow an unexpected defeat for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in July, when he saw his ruling AK party finally lose majority. The once nearly all-powerful president was forced to try to form a coalition to keep his party in parliament. But similar attempts with other parties had failed before. Prime Minister Davutoglu, a former Erdogan advisor, was tasked with forming ties with the Republican People's Party, led by Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who seemed a willing partner for power-sharing talks. But with the collapse of negotiations, the ball is back in Erdogan's court. The president was accused by Kılıçdaroğlu of deliberately sabotaging the talks. Why? The once defeated president may be looking to gain some power once again. Davutoglu announced he will return the mandate to form a government to President Erdogan. This makes a new round of elections in Turkey all the more likely, with a snap poll expected in November. If no deal is reached by August 23rd, Erdogan can then dissolve Davutoglu's cabinet and call for the formation of an interim election government, which may include the cooperation of pro-Kurdish opposition People's Democratic Party, a complex scenario for Ankara, who has termed Kurdish militants as a threat to its safety. But Erdogan may have an even bigger problem on his hands. A new IS video released Tuesday delivers a clear message to the Turkish president.
Evet, hain tağut Erdoğan Türkiye'yi ırkçı PKK'lılara ve Haçlılara sattı. Şam'daki Müslümanları öldürmek ve ateist PKK'lıları korumak için Türkiye'nin hava üslerini Haçlılara ve uçaklarına açtı. Sizi Haçlı Amerika'ya köle yapıp bütün değerlerinizi sattı.
The threat comes as Turkey presses on with its so-called two-pronged war on terror, an air campaign against IS strongholds in Iraq and Syria, and also on the Kurdistan Workers' Party.
And with me right now is Laura Wales in Abuja, Turkey. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
So, Laura, let's try to put things into perspective, because on one side we are seeing the coalition, we are seeing Turkey trying to fight the Kurds, Turkey is trying to fight IS, Turkey is somehow involved with some kind of a peace initiative between Israel and Hamas. Maybe Tayyip Erdogan putting himself in too many positions is actually weakening him at the end of the day.
Well, that's what polls are showing. It's showing that if there is a new re-election, and this is before campaign season, that we'll have basically the same results we had on June 7th, and that led to no majority in parliament. I think the most striking thing about these coalition talks is that, according to the opposition leaders, the de facto ruling party and the formerly ruling party, AK Party, had never actually offered any of them a true coalition beyond a few months when they would have a new re-election. And this seems to be what President Erdogan wanted. Most analysts believe that he was going to get his result, which is as many AK Party members of parliament as possible, so he can change the system from a parliamentary one to a presidential one. He already declared over the weekend that coalition talks were over before they were actually over. He said he was going on the campaign trail, which is actually unconstitutional. He had to resign from his party when he even ran for president, actually. He's supposed to be apolitical. So this is what AK Party is trying, at least President Erdogan, though some people believe that the de facto Prime Minister Davutoglu has really tried, but just cannot escape the power of President Erdogan.
Cannot escape the power of President Erdogan, which means that maybe the people lost their trust in their own president?
That's a possibility. If we go back to the polls showing about the same result, I think those that were led away from AK Party and voted for other parties, it was because they did not want a presidential system. Now, the ultra-nationalist MHP is saying, let's have a referendum and get this over with so that we can actually try to build a government. And I don't know if that will happen. But certainly, I don't think that President Erdogan will relinquish this dream of a presidential system. And if he were to actually succeed, that would put him in power for about 20 years.
So do you really think that he stands a chance to win these elections?
That's a great question, and we just don't know. With this instability, it could be anyone's election, actually. People are afraid. The markets are really disliking what's going on. Excuse me, the lira went to an all-time record low. Actually, today it's 2.9 per $1. So people are just fed up with the instability as well as the economic problems.
Yes, Laura Wales, thank you very, very much for this. Thank you. And we're going to Bangkok. A manhunt is underway in Thailand for a man captured on surveillance video with a backpack at the Erawan Shrine in Bangkok. He's suspected in yesterday's bombing that left at least 20 people dead and another 123 wounded. Military correspondent Shaiban Ari has the latest.
Mystery continues to shroud what has been described as the worst ever terror attack in the history of Thailand. At least 20 people were killed by the blast Monday near the Erawan Hindu shrine in downtown Bangkok. On Tuesday, in a separate incident, another explosion occurred when an unidentified man threw a small explosive, possibly a grenade, into a canal near the Chao Phraya River in the capital. No one was hurt, but the perpetrator remains at large. Meanwhile, an important piece of evidence has emerged in Monday's lethal bombing. This CCTV footage shows a young man in a yellow shirt carefully removing a large backpack in the crowded Erawan Shrine compound before the explosion. He then gets up without the pack and leaves the area.
From the closed-circuit TV footage, we cannot confirm who that is because in the video the suspect might have disguised himself to mislead the officials. There was no evidence left that could identify how the bomb was assembled or how it worked.
Thailand, which has known much political turmoil throughout its history, is currently ruled by the nation's military after an elected government was forcefully removed in May last year. In a statement, the junta's prime minister pointed fingers at political rivals.
In our country, there are individuals or groups of individuals who are seeking to destroy the country. The ongoing attempts at destruction might be politically motivated, targeting the economy, tourism, for whatever reason.
The prime minister cited pre-bombing Facebook messages warning of an imminent threat to the capital and linked to a, quote, anti-government group based in Thailand's northeast, a reference to the anti-coup Red Shirt movement, which supports former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. No evidence of these messages was presented to the media.
If we unite, our solidarity should enable us to swiftly overcome our tribulations so that Thailand can return to normality as soon as possible.
And with me right now, here's military correspondent Shaiban Ari. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
Although we saw the man in the video wearing yellow, the government is accusing the red shirt movement. And should we believe what the government is saying?
I'm not sure we should take the word of the military regime in Thailand for granted. The choice of shirt is not coincidental. The yellow shirts are the rivals of the red shirts, but it might be a very ironic choice by the perpetrator of this attack. There is no proof linking the individual in the footage to any sort of movement at the moment. It would be very strange indeed for the red shirt movement to carry out this kind of attack because the target of this attack was a Hindu shrine that is also visited by many Buddhists in Thailand, and Buddhism is the dominant religion in Thailand. So we're talking about a very mainstream target by a group that is not a fringe group. We're talking about a very mainstream, popular movement that enjoys a lot of support amongst the Thai society, basically.
This basically hurts both sides. So if, let's take under consideration that none of the sides actually took part of this bombing, who could do this?
There are several options. First of all, in southern Thailand, there's an ongoing conflict between the government and Muslim separatists who are active very much in the southern regions. There have been clashes for years now between the military and these rebels. There haven't been ever any attacks in Bangkok in that context. The government has said that this attack does not fit that pattern. Another option would be the option of perhaps terrorists belonging to the Chinese Uyghur minority in China. Back in July, Thailand actually deported a group of 100 Uyghur refugees back to China, and there has been some speculation that this perhaps is some sort of a revenge attack for that move by the Thai military regime, but that remains speculation.
Can we actually delete the possibility of an international terror organization that maybe will take responsibility? Because, for example, if it was IS, probably they would have already taken responsibility on the attack.
Yeah, that stands to logic, though, of course, there have been precedents where there have been attacks that have been linked somehow to IS and no formal claim of responsibility has appeared. This would be a new front, let's say, for the Islamic State, but in a way it does fit a certain pattern. I don't think we can rule it out completely. I think what can probably be ruled out is perhaps Iranian involvement in this kind of attack, because there's no Iranian incidents or terror attacks in Thailand had previously been focused on Israeli targets. no Israeli casualties or targets in this case.
Although a lot of Israelis are traveling and a lot of Israelis are there, so we cannot say this. Can we say that this specific place, Thailand, is basically a place where maybe it's based on the economy of tourism?
Right.
So we cannot cancel maybe the possibility that it's not somebody from the inside who wants to hurt himself.
Right. I think it's a very real possibility that we're talking about an external threat. Of what kind exactly? There's a lot of speculation, and maybe the Chinese Uyghur movement. It could even be perhaps Islamic State or perhaps Al-Qaeda, some other international terrorist group. The threat of a political dispute evolving, let's say, into this kind of terrorism in central Bangkok, I think that has to be seen with a lot of doubt at the moment.
Yes, Shaban Ari, thank you very, very much
No
for
problem.
this. And we're back in the region amid reports and denials that Israel is nearing a long-term truce with Hamas. Israeli opposition leader Isaac Herzog met with Palestinian Authority Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah today. Herzog expressed concern over the recent violent escalation in the West Bank and urged a return to the negotiating table. He had this to say after the meeting.
We agreed on the fact that on the ground in recent weeks and days, there is a deterioration, there is an escalation in terror activities. I told the President that fighting terror and preventing terrorist activities is of utmost priorities to us. We first and foremost must prevent a third intifada. And we've agreed that in order to prevent a third intifada, we must combat terror on the one hand, aggressively, and on the other hand, must move towards a diplomatic process, move to negotiate, move to talk with each other.
Yes, the question is who agreed with who? And we're still here for the first time ever, and so the so-called Red Flag Air Force drill in the U.S. is underway with both Israel and Jordan in attendance. And as correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim explains, it's likely just one of many signs of a new set of alliances in the Middle East.
As Israel's relations with the U.S. have cooled, Jordan's military ties with Israel are warmer than ever. In a first last week, Israeli Air Force fuel tankers escorted Jordanian fighter jets across the Atlantic Ocean on their way to participate in the Red Flag military exercises in the United States. Those exercises usually involve either Israel or an Arab country, but not this time. According to the website Foxtrot Alpha, which focuses on aviation security, 5 Jordanian F-15 fighters were seen flying alongside Israeli KC-707 fuel tankers in the mid-Atlantic. Military observers say this new alliance could be the result of recent political changes across the Mideast. Gulf countries led by Saudi Arabia, in addition to Egypt and Jordan, have long seen Iran as an adversary. Now, with a nuclear deal, their concern has stepped up. There is also a new common regional enemy these days, the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, a threat touching the entire Middle East. Jordan and Israel have worked together on security and intelligence issues in the past, but this military cooperation could usher in a new era of relationships in the ever-volatile Middle East. And though Israel has been the historical enemy in the eyes of Arab states, if these events are any indication, old nemesis are now united against new common threats, Iran and ISIS.
And with me right now is correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. We can say that if we can be relaxed from one country in the Middle East right now, God forbid, is Jordan. Jordan is the only stable country that is maintaining stability in the region, and maybe that Israel can actually trust with its peace accord that it has with it.
It looks like the strongest peace between Israel and any Arab country is between Israel and Jordan. And the stability of Jordan is very important to not only to the region, but also to Israel. And because of that, we are seeing unfamiliar coalitions and cooperations between Israel and Arab countries, mainly Jordan. Israel has just inked a deal with Jordan to supply it with at least 12 drones for Jordan to protect its borders from Daesh, its borders with Syria, and its borders with the Iraq. Also, just in the last few months, Israel had supplied Jordan with 16 Cobras helicopter attacking planes. Those planes Israel had put in out of service, but it has given them to Jordan to help Jordan also with its war.
Although Israel declaring that it's not getting into the war with IS. But try to explain to me, Mohammed, how come Jordan is becoming such or just warming up the relationship with Israel? Because we are always talking about a cold peace, that this is a peace that it's been agreed upon, but everything is good. You are there, we are here, we have like silent on the border. How come Jordan is getting into business with just a few months ago, Jordan wanted to open the Al-Aqsa Mosque for prayers from all the religions. How come it's happening?
Well, there is a common enemy now that's threatening not only Jordan, but also Israel. And this is the first time that we are seeing that publicly that Jordan and Israel are cooperating militarily. We've seen, we know that there is peace between these two countries. We've seen that there has been economic cooperations and in other venues, but not militarily. Air fighters from Royal Jordanian have been assisted and filled with fuel by Israeli tankers. They are doing joint military exercises as we speak in Nevada and the United States. Because of Daesh, it looks like Daesh has united Arab countries with Israel. If you talked about this just a few years ago, this would have been unbelievable and people would have called you crazy.
Because if we are looking at the other side, because if we will look at the Rafah border, for example, if we look at the Sinai border, we will see the same thing happening with Egypt.
That's true. And there is cooperation between Egypt and Israel, and it's not a secret, really. Israel allowed Egypt to let its army, large divisions get into Sinai to fight Daesh in Sinai. So Jordan it's not a first for an Arab country to cooperate militarily with Israel, but when it comes to Jordan, it's the first time. And we're seeing also ties strengthen, even though it's in secret, between Israel and some of the Gulf countries.
Well, this looks interesting. Maybe the next edition we will do it in Jordan. Correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim, thank you very, very much for this. We're going out for a small break, 2 minutes, and I'll be back for the second part of the news today. Don't go anywhere. Syrian regime slams the United Nations for a lack of objectivity in the conflict as the Security Council pushes for a peace plan and political transition. In a new video, the Islamic State terror group calls for Turks to rebel against their government, and meanwhile, having failed to form a coalition, Ankara moves closer to early elections. And the shrine bombing in Bangkok, the death toll rises to at least 20 people, with a massive manhunt underway for a suspect captured on camera leaving a backpack at the scene. Welcome back to the news today. Palestinian hunger striker Mohammed Allan has woken up and his condition has stabilized after losing consciousness on Friday. Allan, a suspected Islamic Jihad militant, has been on hunger strike for over 60 days to protest his imprisonment. A Palestinian group today gave Israel an ultimatum that if his case is not resolved in 24 hours, he will ask for all treatment to halt and stop drinking water. And with I-24 News Arabic anchor and correspondent Mohammed Majadla sat down today with Palestinian Authority Prisoner Affairs Minister Isa Karaka. Here's some of what he had to say about this.
The bottom line is this: Israel wants to kill Mohammed Allan. The Israeli government and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are responsible for refusing Allan's request to be freed from administrative detention. Allan has been clear in his statement. If I'm accused of anything, I'm prepared to face a just trial. But remaining in administrative detention, without knowing what I'm accused of, or if I will ever be set free, this is a punitive and cruel measure. Therefore, Ahlan has gone on a strike, following his unjust detention. There is likely a political decision to keep Ahlan in the state of strike until he dies. And this is indeed what's happening. Israel is committing a crime against Ahlan. Everyone agrees that Israel's treatment of Ahlan's protest is unique. The International Red Cross, the lawyers, the legal administration, they all agree that Israel's response suggests that it wants to see Ahlan dead, or to force him to stop his hunger strike. This is where things stand.
And with me on the line right now from Ramallah is former Palestinian Minister of Prisoners Affairs, Ashraf Al-Ajrami. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good evening.
Mr. Al-Ajrami, you just heard with me Minister Isa Karaka saying that Israel actually wants Mohammed Ahlan to die, actually maybe trying to kill Mohammed Ahlan. Do you think that this is actually the aim of Israel at the end of the day? Because if we're looking at it on an objective way, this won't be good neither to the Palestinian Authority or to Israel.
I don't think that Israel wants to cause that Mohammed Ahlan dies. Because it is not in favor of Israel. It is not the Israeli interest to make him or to have him die. I think the Israeli government tries all the time to save his life without paying the price that he wants to get free and to be outside.
So try, Mr. Al-Ajrami, to explain to me why Isa Karaka is saying what he said. Because what? He's trying to clean his conscience because of the Palestinian Authority not doing enough for Mohammed Ahlan? Or not doing enough for somebody from the Islamic Jihad that might find or maybe undermine the Palestinian Authority president?
I think that Isa Karaka and the Palestinian Authority now sees that the Israeli Authority is responsible for his life. Because of that, they think that if anything happens to Mohammed Ahlan, the Israeli government will be responsible and of anything harmful. So because of that, maybe the words are not suitable, but I think this is the main idea, that Israel is responsible for his life. This is the main issue for the Palestinian Authority and the others.
Yes, Mr. Ashraf Al-Ajrami, thank you very, very much for this. Thank you. The investigation over the deadly explosions in Tianjin, China last week continues. Chinese authorities are looking at the head of the country's work safety regulator, with another 10 senior executives of the warehouse company set to be detained. The blast at the warehouse storing dangerous chemicals left 114 people dead and over 700 injured, and have since sparked fears over toxicity in the air. More details from Gabby Tartakovsky.
There are cyanide deposits 20 times over safety limits in water within the exclusion zone of the Tianjin blast site that killed 114 people and left hundreds wounded. The information was advanced by Chinese officials, who also said deposits outside the exclusion zone are within safe limits.
All the sites registering amounts over the limit are within the exclusion zone. The largest amount over the limit is 28.4 times. Above limit cyanide deposits have yet to be discovered at the 14 sites outside the exclusion zone.
Soldiers and rescue workers in gas masks and hazard suits continued to search for toxic materials at the blast site on Tuesday. The goal is to clear the chemicals before any rain falls, which could create further toxic gas. 57 people are still unaccounted for. Meanwhile, displaced residents demonstrated outside a Tianjin hotel, demanding government compensation for the badly damaged apartments. Some 6,300 people have been evacuated from around the sites of the blasts.
And with me right now is environmental journalist Neta Khitou. Good evening.
Good evening.
Let's try to understand what really the dangers that China is experiencing right now in this specific zone.
So there are a lot of chemicals that have been exploded over there, and people are hysterical, and they say that the government and the authorities are not giving them answers and not saying, the amount of chemicals that are there. And to add to all of this, mess, today it was raining over there, and the rain, it has a danger of evaporating all the chemicals from the ground and also doing some reactions with other chemicals that are in the area, and no one really knows what's going to happen, and it's really, really dangerous because what they do know is that there is sodium cyanide there in the factory that has been exploded.
So this can create what for the people?
Okay, if you are exposed to a minor amount of it, it's irritating in your eyes and skin and some, breath problems. But if you're exposed to a big amount, it's a gas. It's a killing gas. In some U.S. chambers of death, they use it. In the gas chambers, they use this specific gas. So a big amount of it could be very, very dangerous for people, for the environment, for animals, for everybody around it. And also, they weren't supposed to put residential buildings next to this chemical.
Exactly what I wanted to ask you, because didn't they expect, usually when you're building a place, when you're building a warehouse, you're taking under consideration that something bad might happen in the worst case. Nobody took these measures before?
Nobody took these measures. This is why the people are very, very angry at the authorities there, also for not getting answers, but also for, to begin with, they built it wrong, and there are rumors, it's not yet certain, that they were like 700 times more chemicals than what is allowed by law to be there in this warehouse.
What is happening to the people who are working in this warehouse?
It's really bad. That's why there's still firemen that are, haven't been found yet, and they're still trying to find out what's going on. But if you'll see the pictures and photos, all of the people are with masks because they are afraid. They don't know what's going to happen. And also drinking water, and no one is sure what will happen with them. The authorities are saying that everything is okay, and they checked in 20 places, 20 spots.
I'm seeing the images coming out the day after the bombing, and it looks like it was, a chemical bomb that just a nuclear bomb that exploded and left an entire place in a total holocaust. It just reminds me of some of the footage that I saw from Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Exactly.
What will be in the future the consequences of such an explosion?
So they try to close the compound kind of, and they put sand around it, and they're trying to clean the water as fast as they can. But the consequences will be bad, I think, for soil, for the air, and for the water there. And people are afraid. Some people are left homeless, and I think maybe it's for the best, for them, because they can look for another house in a better and safer environment.
Yes. Neta Khitou, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Indonesian rescue workers have reached the crash site of a passenger plane in a mountainous area in the country's eastern province of Papua. All 54 bodies have been found, along with the plane's black box. The latest from the I-24 News desk.
Indonesian search and rescue teams found the bodies of 54 passengers killed in a plane crash in Indonesia's Papua province. The teams arrived at the site of the crash in the remote mountainous area on Tuesday, 2 days after the Trigana air flight went down this last weekend. The statement confirms there were no survivors, and officials said all aboard were Indonesian nationals.
Search and Rescue Agency, as well as other search teams from Timika, managed to find all 54 bodies as of 12:15 p.m. local time. All the bodies are now in body bags, waiting to be evacuated. It is not right to talk about the condition of the bodies here in this news conference. Everything is in pieces.
Rescuers have also found the aircraft's black boxes. Although bad weather has been suggested as a probable cause, Investigators have declined to advance a more definitive hypothesis before a full investigation is carried out. The aircraft disappeared just about 10 minutes before reaching its destination, and according to one official, it was carrying around $470,000 in cash for distribution to poorer families in the area. There is no information on whether the sum was found. The Aviation Safety Network said Trigana Air Service has had 14 serious incidents since it began operations in 1991. The airline has been on the European Union's list of banned carriers since 2007 due to safety or regulatory concerns.
And we're going to Greece. Some amazing numbers on the Mediterranean migrant crisis and Greece. The UN reports today that nearly 21,000 refugees and migrants arrived in Greece last week alone. That's nearly half the total number of arrivals in 2014. The Greek island of Kos has been in the eye of the storm. With Greece already in economic crisis, thousands are staying on the island and waiting for processing by Greek authorities. Over 160,000 people have arrived since January. And with me to talk about something that I really don't understand the concept of is Niamh Ellis, economy reporter for the Jerusalem Post. Good evening.
Good evening.
We talked about it once. I still don't understand it. Bitcoins.
Bitcoins, yeah. Bitcoin is the cryptocurrency. It's this made-up thing that they found a really neat algorithm, a really neat program that lets people trade a piece of software without copying it the same way that you can money. And that's something that's developed into this big sort of alternative currency that so far has caught on a little bit, but not on a wide scale. But now something dramatic has happened. Basically, the way that it works is that there's sort of a central ledger that every time someone trades a Bitcoin, it goes through and marks it. And the original Bitcoin could only, because of the size of that ledger, could only process so many transactions a day.
Okay.
So now there were, as it's growing and growing, there was a worry within the Bitcoin community that it wasn't going to be enough. You know, Visa, MasterCard, they can process hundreds and hundreds of thousands of transactions every minute, and here they could only process 300,000 transactions a day.
300,000 transactions a day. It means that basically not a lot of people are using this around the world.
Exactly, but they say this is growing and it's going to pass that limit soon, so we need to do it. And the problem was that the two sides of the community, you know, who are sort of organizing it and trying to help get it out there, couldn't agree. So one side in the last few days split off, and they said, okay, well, we're starting Bitcoin XT, which is hopefully they want it to, you know, go and sort of replace Bitcoin. And they say that if enough people start using it, then this will be the new Bitcoin. But other people are worried that it's just going to mean, uh-oh, this doesn't exist anymore.
Exactly. This money that for us, it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So how can you make people, us, who we need to see things, to touch them, to feel that we have the money, although sometimes we don't have it in the bank, in order to believe that we to actually use it? Yeah. How can you make people trust this money?
And it's fascinating, right? Because most of my money is electronic. It's not in my pockets. It's in a bank, which I see as numbers on a screen or on a receipt, but I know that it's there because it's backed up by banks and by the government. And, you know, this is something that has value because the people that own them agree that they have value, because people are willing to buy and sell them for a certain price. And that's what makes it so interesting, because they're trying to figure out what role does this play. And the fact that it's split right now is worrying some of the members. You know, the people at Split said, we're doing this to save Bitcoin, to make it functional in the future. And the people who didn't agree to that said, wait a minute, now our community is split in two. If the only value of this comes because we agree it has value, maybe that means that none of the Bitcoins will have value anymore.
Exactly. So it means that if I want today to invest in a Bitcoin, maybe I should wait and see what is happening?
If I were you, I would wait just a few more months until this little controversy sorts itself out. Because how do you know which one to get? The old one, the new one, which ones will convert? This is the big deal. That's the crisis that's sort of hitting Bitcoin today.
You know, I'm looking at this and I'm trying to understand really if it can, from your perspective, if it can really work ever. because it's also psychology, and it's changing the minds of people to actually start seeing, in this case not seeing, money in a certain way.
I think that that's exactly the sort of growing pains that we're seeing cryptocurrencies and all sorts of virtual currencies like this go through. This is really cutting edge, which is why it's been so volatile. The price has been up and down. Some places have tried to adopt it. Some places are sort of realizing that it's still an early technology. It's possible that one day this is going to be the most natural thing. Of course there's Bitcoin. Of course you can pay in Bitcoin, but or whatever future currency comes to replace it. But I think that this is exactly the kind of process that we're going to see until that becomes established, until everyone sort of buys into it and says, okay, this is safe, and I'm willing to have this and put it in my wallet.
It took me like 10 years to actually purchase something on the internet. Now you want me to trust something that I don't, money that I don't see. I don't know about that. But Niamh El, it's just always a pleasure, and you always make me understand things in a better way.
Glad to help.
And more good news for Republican presidential candidate and real estate mogul Donald Trump. A new CNN ORC poll shows him as a clear leader for the GOP nomination with 24% support of Republican registered voters. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush stands lookout at 13% only. It's unbelievable. Earlier this year, Brazil saw another day of intense protest across the country as tens of thousands came out against President Dilma Rousseff and her administration. This comes 5 months after the first wave of mass protests following a major corruption scandal and a struggling economy. I-24 News reporter Ur Shapira has the story.
Tens of thousands of people flooded major cities in Brazil Sunday, demanding President Dilma Rousseff and the Workers' Party step down. This was the third biggest protest the South American country has known since Rousseff was re-elected in 2014.
I am here today because I believe that we can change things. We want to push the Workers' Party out of power. We want Brazil back. I want to show my children that they have to fight for what they believe in, and we believe in a better Brazil, without Rousseff and without the PT.
At the center of this new crisis stands a multi-billion-dollar corruption scandal involving the state-run oil firm Petrobras. The international head of Petrobras, Nestor Cervero, was sentenced to 12 years in jail Monday for money laundering related to a bribe allegedly paid to the Speaker of Brazil's lower house of parliament. According to analysts, the country is expecting its worst gross domestic product in 25 years. Latest polls show that Rousseff is the most unpopular president in 3 decades. None of this is enough to make her uncomfortable.
I would never consider quitting because it's not possible for someone trying to further a particular process or policy to try and take down a representative, and in this case, the president, who was elected by popular vote.
In 2013, Brazil was shaken by a series of protests and riots following an increase in transportation prices and the high expenses related to the 2014 World Cup. Now, a year before Rio hosts the Olympic Games, the unrest is returning to the País Tropical.
And to pick up from this point, right now here with me in the studios, Uri Shapiro. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. Try to explain to me, Uri, please, how come a country that is struggling so much in an economic aspect, in a social aspect, allowing itself to host the World Cup, to host Olympic Games, how come?
And all in 4 years. Well, actually, it's funny that you mentioned the World Cup, because I think the World Cup was a turning point when the huge protests of 2012, 2013 actually dissolved. People were really excited from the games. It also helped the economy, raised income. Up until the loss to the German team, I think everything was fun.
Yeah, so it basically gave them, what, a boost to say that the Olympic Games can be actually good for Brazil?
Yeah, I think it's very good for Brazil. It's international competition. Many businesses are involved.
So they're not protesting about this, but let's talk a little bit about, let's say, the problematic, controversial figure, let's say, President Dilma Rousseff. She is
a huge disappointment. A huge disappointment for the Brazilians. Someone who raised from the bottom. Actually, she came as she was in the 70s a part of a guerrilla group, a leftist guerrilla group who fought the government, and she was arrested in 1970, and she promised a big change, huge promise in 2010, when she was first elected.
How come she failed in this, Uri? Because it seems that a person that is coming from the people, that understands exactly the problems, is getting to a point where everyone is looking at him and don't like him in such a, big amount of people don't really pro her. How come it's happening?
I'm not sure that she's exactly the problem. Although she was the energy minister and she was in charge of the oil company, I'm not sure that she's the problem, but I think the bad economy, it's all influenced this huge country.
And the corruption, which leads us, where is the opposition in this specific case?
The opposition is struggling internal war. So there's you can't see really a dominant opposition in this country.
Internal war with power, with balancing power and corruption also in the opposition?
Yeah, well, the PSDB party, which competed Rousseff in 2014, they lost the elections. It was a close race, but Neves, the leader of the party, is still struggling. And actually, the people who were the opponents of Rousseff are also involved in all sort of scandals.
And of course, corruption, it's always coming up again and again. Opposition coalition, same but different.
Very interesting in Brazil.
Yes, Uri Shapiro, thank you very much for this. Thank you. And here in the Middle East, here in Israel also, we're not the only ones who are in the midst of a heat wave in the U.S. Record-breaking heat from the northeast to the west, with temperatures in the triple digits Fahrenheit, are taking a toll on firefighters already stretched thin, fighting dozens of wildfires across the west. ABC has more.
From the east,
triple digits, miserable.
To the west.
The humidity was out of control and it made it even hotter.
It was a muggy Monday in New York City, the first heat wave in 2 years as temperatures soared. Millions of Americans baked in that dangerous summer sun, so many headed for water, looking for ways to survive the extreme heat.
Just trying to cool off on this nice day, even though it's a little hot. He's enjoying the water.
Across the West, the heat and dry conditions have fueled wildfires burning out of control in several states. On the front lines, 30,000 firefighters who are stretched so thin, active military troops have been called in as reinforcements for the first time in a decade. In Chelan, Washington, where dozens of homes have been destroyed, dozens more threatened, fire officials are putting out a call for help overseas.
We'll also be looking at other nations that we generally work with, like Australia and New Zealand.
And to make matters worse, there are air quality alerts as the smoke from those nearly 90 wildfires moves across the country. So many just looking for some relief during these dog days of summer. Kenneth Moten, ABC News, Washington.
And let's read a little bit. And with me here is correspondent and author Ayman Siksi. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
And today we're going to talk about the billion-dollar spy. Who is he?
The billion-dollar spy is Adolf Tolkachev. Now, before I tell you about him, there's a reason why it's important to talk about him today. We live in an age where spies, those mythological spies, are no longer glamorous. ISIS is ravaging the Middle East. Let's not even go into what's happening in Syria.
Really
not. War is going on in East Ukraine. So much is happening. Those spies that we used to read about or see in books, old-time movies, they're no longer interesting. But David E. Hoffman, who's a brilliant writer, a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, wrote this biography of Adolf Tolkachev, who's a Russian nationalist who voluntarily and willingly spied for the U.S. during the Cold War.
And he did this because?
He did this because he was animate about destroying the Soviet Union.
Okay.
Yes. Now, he was an electronics engineer in his 50s, the kind of man who you'd never suspect of doing something like this. And the reason he's called the billion-dollar spy is because he had access to really classified military material that really elaborated on what the Russians were planning during the war.
Yes.
And he saved the U.S. an estimated $3 billion with the information that he sent to them. So they named him the billion-dollar spy.
So what this, let's say, book is revealing, what's new information? Is it revealing for us on the Cold War that we didn't know before?
Well, it's revealing a really interesting relationship between the U.S. and Russia. His case is really interesting was because he was in Russia at the time. The U.S. troops were in Russia at the time, and CIA officials. He went up to them and offered them material. They didn't believe him. They thought he was KGB. He had to give them more and more and more material until they were hooked, and they finally believed him. And at that point, he demanded money and lots of it. So he kept confusing them.
You know, it's amazing because I'm trying to think to myself, if Snowden came with this information and that information and nobody believed him, and then after he brought so much information, they said, okay, maybe he is right at the end of the day.
And that's why this book is important. Another reason is this is a topic that's still very high on our minds right now. Espionage, the NSA, Snowden, we're still dealing with this today in a new, different way.
Well, it's a good material thing to read on my vacation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy.
And for this recommendation, we're going out for a small break, an update from our news desk, and then we will be back for the third part of the news today. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the news today. Figures published by the Israeli army show that during the year 2014, the number of soldiers that committed suicide doubled compared to the previous year. These numbers are bringing up a question already well known in the U.S. Does the army provide enough psychological support to its soldiers? And it's not only during the 3 years of mandatory service in Israel. One known phenomenon is people suffering from post-traumatic stress after their service without even knowing what is the cause of their behavior. With me to understand a little bit more about this is Professor Danny Brom, Director of the Israel Center for Psychotrauma in Jerusalem. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening.
And also filmmaker Yariv Horowitz, who directed the film Aftershock on the issue. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. You know, lately we are experiencing and we are reading more and more about soldiers who are committing suicide, especially after Operation Protective Edge. You can see one report coming out, but nobody is giving it enough focus. And I'm trying to understand, these people who are committing suicide, there is a reason for it. And there is a reason also why the IDF is just maybe ignoring this, because this is not enough of a big problem to deal with, because these people are maybe went crazy one day?
I have no idea why the IDF doesn't deal with it, though. I thought during my time, after the first Intifada, there was soldiers in the unit that I was with them actually in Nablus as an army photographer, that years later went to army psychologists and psychiatrists, and it was actually covered by the army. But I think in the beginning nobody wanna admit that maybe it's a difficult, too difficult job to actually face and to know what to do with.
What did you feel during this period of time? Did you understand back then that you are experiencing post-trauma?
I think that, a good friend of mine from France, actually she's Lebanese, but she lives in France, she told me, you Israelis, all of you are post-traumatic disorder. I see all of you, it doesn't matter what I've been in, like 3 wars already. In my generation, there was 3 wars, Lebanon and twice Gaza. And so every generation have his own war or some other very violent things that happen around him. It's very difficult not to be post-traumatic. I think that everyone is post-traumatic, but there is people who cannot take it anymore. That's maybe when they go to the other phase. But for example, I have to tell you something about the mentality here is that when I made my first film about, post-traumatic disorder of soldiers in the West Bank, I met one of the heads of Channel 2 News, and he used to be a fighter, during the 73 war, and he told me, you are whining, your generation is whining, what have you done? Okay, you went to the West Bank and you tried to put down demonstration. I was suffering a real trauma, in the tanks in the South. How can you? So it seems that to be an Israeli, people want you to deal with these very violent issues around you without any, like it's okay, but it's not okay.
It's not okay. It's not okay. And can we say that everyone who are living in the Middle East are suffering from post-trauma? Because if you will take maybe someone who's living in Switzerland, for example, his life is totally different.
So let's put things a bit in perspective. First, you said there's double the amount of people who committed suicide in the army. Now, still we have to, that is of course terrible. And the army is doing a lot, and I don't think that nowadays you can say Israeli army is not taking care of this. So we are far below the number of people or the percentage of people that commit suicide in the American army or other armies.
Well, they're fighting bigger wars.
We're fighting a continuous war. We're still in war. That is very clear, and that has a price. It doesn't mean that you are in a disorder. But it's true that Israeli mentality and that people who've served for 3 or more years in the army don't pay a price. Of course they pay a price. It doesn't mean some people have post-traumatic stress disorder. Other people have partial symptoms. A lot of people, there's about 25% of people who come out of it and have no symptoms at all. But 75% of people do have some symptoms, some dream about it, some are hyperactive and things like that.
I'm trying to understand, because when you are in the army, you're 18 years old. You are being given a gun. You're being told to go and serve and maybe kill. You're seeing your friends die. You're doing things maybe that you are not actually precisely agree with, maybe with you when you're having discussions with yourself, and you're only 18 years old. This time Americans are going to college, people are going on spring breaks. Here people are going to fight. When do you start experiencing this? When sometimes it's just the birth of your child is bringing you back bad memories, or it's just a small dream that can just put you in post-trauma?
Yeah, it's also sort of a give and take between society and the story you can or cannot tell. We started 7 years ago, we started a project for whole combat units, taking some time, and among them a whole week, to have them sit down and think, what happened to us? And that is, we call that the Peace of Mind project. And that is not only for post-traumatic people, that is for whole units. And then you see they're dying to talk. And they are full of guilt feelings, they're full of questions, what they want to ask the other people in the unit, and they have just no opportunity to do that. So we started that, and then you get the same responses often from the people who've been there for many years and say, well, I didn't need that, so why would people need it now? But the culture has changed. There is a need to put things out, to deal with it, and to see if we don't have peace, at least peace of mind.
I want to show a part of the movie, Aftershock. Let's see a part of it, and then we will continue discussing.
היינו עושים זה הרבה שימושים. אתה יודע מה היינו עושים זה עם המלאק? היינו לוקחים את הפקקים של הקוקה-קולה מהברזל וחותכים אותם משפיצים קטנים רעים כאלה ומפרידים את השלוש רומה לרומה אחד, עושים את זה בפנים ואז יורם. היום מחדדים את זה עם סכינים. כן, עם סכינים. זה הגורל, בבת 17 אדוני אלוהינו אדוני. השתנה שום דבר. הם עומדים מהצד הזה, הם זורקים מהצד הזה. תכף הם יראו, ירדפו אחריהם, לא יתפסו אף אחד. זה הכל, לא השתנה שום דבר. אבל האמת שאני מה זה מפחד. כשהייתי חייל לא פחדתי ככה. אולי בגלל שאין לי נשק ואין לי שום אמצעי להגן על עצמי, אז אני קצת מפחד. בגלל שיש לי גם ילד ועוד ילד בדרך.
You know, it's amazing to see it because I don't have an army, because I don't have a gun. I don't have the means to protect myself, so I'm scared right now. Or maybe we're allowing ourselves to be scared after we're leaving the army. Maybe we're allowing ourselves to, let's say, leave what our parents left in us and told us always, you need to be brave, you need to be a brave boy, you need to be a hero, you need to be strong, and maybe you need to be a man, and maybe you cannot be a man all the time.
I think from if you see this movie, what you realize is that actually Ehud, this guy, the end of the movie actually, he started to feel really bad after his first kid was born, and it's not because of his fear. He said that in the beginning, when his kid was crying at night, he used to remember Palestinian kids crying after that actually we were throwing gas tear in the streets, and there was this massive crying of babies, Palestinian babies. And then when his kid was born, he was in shock, because then he realized how precious the life of his kid, you know, and when he's crying and he feels so bad about it. And then he realized that when he was 18, there was so many Palestinian kids that were crying because of the tear gas and so and so. So it's not just from the place of being born, it's a clash of morality as well.
Exactly. It's not only, it's clash of morality, and it becomes like clash of a political dispute. It's like if you are saying, it seems that if you're saying that you feel sorry, or you feel that you weren't okay, or you are cheering the cry of Palestinian babies, today, if I believe that if some people will hear you saying this, Israelis right now, or the Israeli society will hear you saying this, they will tell you, you are leftists. You are not patriotic to your country. How come you're doing a movie about this? You don't need to feel sorry for fighting your enemies.
Well, we have to be very careful not to get into this splitting. That there are dangers, that there is an army. Yeah, that's a political issue. And that my kids are serving, yeah, that is a fact. If we start to split up and say, suffering then means that you're weak and left-wing, or I don't know what, we get into trouble. It's clear that from all sides, wars have a price.
But isn't it getting us into trouble? Maybe these soldiers that are seeing the, let's say, the feeling among the Israeli society are feeling that they are not able to express their suffering because people will stereotype them and will say that they are not patriotic enough.
I'll give you a different example. Someone in the army who was in a shooting with people who started to shoot at the army at one of the borders, and he did exactly what he had to do. He killed the one who shot at and injured his commander. And everyone said, you know, you're a hero, it's fantastic. He knew that this is what he had to do. And after he got out of the army, he stepped into his bed and didn't come out for 6 months. And felt terrible about taking someone's life. He knew exactly that this is what he had to do. And he didn't feel that there was anything else he wanted to do. But there is a price when you do that. So we have to be really careful not to make this into a right-left discussion, but see what it is that we need to cope with, and then be so courageous to let people cope with that, speak about it, and be with them, not let them be alone or put them in some sort of a camp. That's the easy solution.
Did you put yourself in a camp? Did your friends put themselves in a camp, like in a camp, and not deal with it and not talk about it?
Not even one. You know, in the end of the day, even my most, you know, my friends from my village in Binyamina, that's a strong place, Some of them are in the Shayetet, and they deal with it with the special forces, the Navy SEAL, and they still have, you can hear them saying, like not a while ago, I heard a friend of mine, like a real very brave guy who killed people, and it was good that he done it because there were people who wanted to make some terror attacks in Israel, and they got them before. But as well, he asking himself a lot of questions, and I think that in a way, maybe I will tell it sounds crazy, but in a way, it's again. I feel that it's against my my everything, my ideas, my beliefs, my Jewish identity to fight. It's a new thing. I think that the Jewish goes to war. We didn't do it for 100. The last 75 years we're doing it, but before that, for thousands of years, there was completely. It was against the whole Jewish thinking. And I see my friends that they are so. They don't know how to react to it. They call it a Yiddisher Piraten. It's like, okay, we're tough, we're going to fight, but in the end of the day, you go to the seder, you go to your family, your mother come to the camp, she give you gefilte or whatever, they give you food. It's not in the culture to be so brave. It's not in the culture. And I have to say that what you told me, just my story that I said about, the kids crying, the babies, it sounds fascist. It's horrible. It's for us that we have, you go to school and you study about violence, you study about the Second World War, you study about a lot of horrible things, and then you go and you become, from what I see from my people, you become very confused.
Are we doomed?
No, because then, and that is what we're starting to do, then we're doing the Jewish thing. We're taking these groups of combat soldiers, bring them to Jewish communities somewhere in the world with the Peace of Mind program. And we basically practice V'higadat lebincha. We tell them, speak about it. And you only have to say that, and they start to speak, and they start to heal.
Gentlemen, I am amazed that 16 minutes just went by. Thank you very, very much for this conversation that you had with me. Thank you very much. And thank you, our viewers, for being with me tonight. Tomorrow we'll be here again at the same time, same place from the Jaffa Port. Have a relaxed evening. Have a good night.